Okay. I'm going to note the hour, 7 o'clock, the presence of a quorum. Welcome, everybody. And the cookies have made it around the school committee table. Thank you, Leela. And therefore, I will call the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee to order. Members of the public who wish to watch the meeting online may do so on ActonTV's YouTube channel, found at the top of our agenda. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded and will be posted on ActonTV's website at actontv.org. I would like to welcome up our ABRHS student representatives for an update, please. Welcome, Molly. Make sure that microphone's on, too.
Okay. There she is. Okay. She was coming, yeah. I'm Molly. I'm a junior. I want to talk about how some students in the school, especially freshmen, which I know they're younger, so they're more immature, but at lunchtime especially, they've been in the common areas being very rowdy and very noisy, and they've been throwing trash and leaving trash everywhere. And Ms. Dean has talked about it, and the lunch monitors who stand in these commons have talked about it, but there isn't much being done, so it's a little stressful for the rest of us when we're sitting, trying to eat lunch, and there's this big group of boys sitting in the commons, screaming at each other and throwing trash around. So, yeah. And also, I know we're talking about the cell phone policy tonight, so I just wanted to give some insight on what the high school's been doing. Last year, or the beginning of this year, they implemented a policy saying no cell phones in class, and each classroom has a sort of pocket holder. I'm sure you know about that, for the phones. Nobody actually uses them, but I do think the no cell phones in class is being pressed. I think people are following that pretty well. So I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about your policy.
Thank you. Any other high school reps want to come up?
Hello, I'm Diksha. I'm a sophomore, and I would like to talk to you guys today about the MCAS Flex Block, we're calling that. We'll work on the name. It's pretty boring right now. But what we're planning on doing is we're planning on having a community building activity. Currently, ABRHS and this group of admin is helping us plan this on the MCAS testing day in March, I think. And so we're planning on giving students, clubs, and staff the opportunity to share presentations about their cultural experiences, anything about the community, social justice topics, equity topics, and just to raise awareness about these issues in our community, in our school, and about the world as well. And something that we're planning to have alongside these presentations is a presentation from formerly incarcerated people. I just had to run all the way over here, sorry. But so we have this every year, and these people, they come in to speak about their experiences and how the justice system and the prison system and their experiences with that. And so this is going to be a whole school activity and a community building opportunity, and we're really excited to see how it goes. So thank you.
Thank you, Diksha. Anyone else? All right. Thank you guys so much for the update. Thanks for coming. Sorry you had to run all the way up here in the cold, Diksha. All right, next item is our public participation. As per our school committee policy, members of the public are invited to speak for up to 3 minutes. We will dedicate a maximum of 20 minutes to public participation. Speakers must be recognized by the chair before speaking, and the committee does not typically respond to comments made during public participation. Members of the public wishing to speak, please come forward to the microphone.
Hi, I'm Corinne Hogseth from Seminole Road. I was very glad to hear from Molly that there has been some effort to curtail the use of cell phones in the schools. That wasn't the deal when my kids were in there. So I did look at the policy. There's no teeth to this policy at all. It's like there will be a policy, there will be rules. At a minimum, you could, by February break, you could put out a policy, you could have a first reading and a second reading and a vote before February break to simply ban them, at least in elementary schools. That should be a no-brainer. As far as the junior high school and the high school, I think they should be banned there as well. There's no question anymore how damaging the social media is, particularly for teenage girls, and they're on their phones all day long. So it's not like they're using their phones just for educational pursuit during the school day. So I would like to see a much tougher, I don't want to say tougher, healthier policy for our kids. They're the worst thing on earth. And I think a lot of us wish we could put that horse back in the barn. Really, does anybody think they're good? I don't know, sorry, I know you want to answer me. And so now, I did send an email regarding the decision that was made, or I guess there's going to be a vote, a roll call vote tonight to vote on whether or not, or I'll say to cover the employees' share of the increase in the health insurance premiums through June. My concern there is that it's going to impact the override that you're pursuing, and if nothing else, at least the budget, and if there's no override, that means that whatever you gift to the teachers, you take away from the students. And so I know you said it was in exchange for bargaining down the road, and so I hope there's some way you can ensure that for our $408,000 that have just been turned over to the teachers, that we will get more than that back from the bargaining process, and that this will not impact taxpayers any more than it already has. At the first meeting, or the memo, I'm sorry if I'm getting close to 3 minutes, the memo from October 27th, it was $7 million. By the time we got to the meeting, it was $8 million. The following meeting, November 16th, we were saying, oh, 8.5, 9, because now we're talking in increments of $500,000. And I hope that this doesn't push it to $9 to $9.5 million. So I know you're going to vote to do it, but I do hope that this does not come back to bite us in the behind. Thank you.
Thanks, Corinne. And I do appreciate the messages you've been sending us. It gives us some time to come up with an adequate response, and so we'll have some of those for you this evening throughout the meeting. Next.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Austin Kim, and I'm a junior. I'm here as a member of Resource Force, a student-led environmental team at ABRHS, in support of the climate resolution. Last June, we sent a decarbonization resolution, and we would like to continuously reiterate our sentiments and our commitment that this school board ought to take action against climate change, as it is an existential crisis. But yet again, let me explain what our resolution really is. Our resolution is just a resolution. It's not an exact detailed plan of what the school committee actually has to do right now. When we replace equipment like gas furnaces or buses, or when we expand buses. We're not asking an unreasonable thing. We're just making sure that the school does not autopilot towards unsustainable infrastructure. Lastly, remember the ones that are supporting this resolution are students like me, Austin, and like Alex behind me, and like Sneha, who's unfortunately not here today, but we wish she was. But you get the point. The people who are supporting this resolution are your friends and family, and there's real support for this resolution. And we hope that you keep our resolution in consideration and hopefully, maybe someday, put it in a vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Austin.
My name is Alex Hua, and I'm also a junior, and I'm also a part of Resource Force. We acknowledge that the school committee is understandably concerned about the budget crisis. However, climate action is not something that we can just postpone. We're not asking for capital investment right now, as our resolution calls for capital investments that will happen over the next 2 decades. These are necessary long-term improvements, and there's been no better time to do this. As a result of the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, and the Inflation Reduction Act, there are billions of dollars of tax credit grants and other incentives that are available right now. These acts have constituted the largest investments in climate action that the United States has ever put into law, and it's up to the school committee to take advantage of them.
Thank you, Alex. Hi, David.
Good evening. My comment is on the first reading of the SRO program policy. Pre-pandemic, I met with 10 black students from our high school. We discussed many topics, among them the police. The students pointed out some things that the police did which the students considered unfair. I verified some of these with my youngest, who had recently graduated and was in college at that time. There are certainly areas where we can improve. However, the black students specifically called out one particular officer for compliments. They would say things like, except for Officer so-and-so, the police do X. Since one officer was fair in the eyes of these students, my conclusion is that it's possible to have a fair and excellent SRO program. I appreciate the professionalism of Acton's accredited police department. For decades, Acton Police Department has had programs like restorative justice instead of prosecution, de-escalating domestic violence with referral to social service agencies to reduce arrests, etc. 3 or 4 patrol officers are on duty around the clock in Acton. Patrol officers get familiar with their area of town and the people who live there. If we didn't have SROs, controlled area with a daytime population equivalent to one of our patrol areas, the police would be less familiar when emergencies arise. I believe that we should define high standards by which we want the SRO program to operate and make sure that we adhere to them. Tensions and suspicions aren't lessened by separating any groups of people, in this case, students and the police. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Any other public comments? All right, seeing none, thank you, everyone. We will move on to the superintendent's update. To Peter.
All right, thank you, Adam. First, I just want to give a shout out to our students who came and spoke. It's always great to hear student voice at the meeting, so thank you very much for doing that. And I recognize that can be hard as students unless you're professionals like our student reps. You know, first, we've been working a lot over the last couple of weeks to educate members of the community about the budget challenge we're facing and what's contributing to the projected $9.5 million gap. Over the last 2 weeks, Andrew, Sherry, and I have been presenting to faculty at each of the schools. We've presented to joint PTSO and at a joint meeting of the Boxborough Select Board and Finance Committee. I'm also in the process of creating a brief video to share with families in hopefully tomorrow's superintendent update, if I can get it done, just outlining what the deficit is and why we're seeing it and the numbers that are driving it. You know, we are also, Andrew and I have been working on a process for engagement by families and also with our staff for them to be able to provide feedback into what's important to them in both an A and B version of the budget. So, you know, I'm working on right now, you know, potential family survey, but also an opportunity to send direct emails or even some small group focus groups with families just to hear what's important. Obviously, we're not going to meet with, you know, 5,000 families, but hopefully we can get a cross-section of families who want to meet, talk through the budget, what's important to them, what they're hoping for the schools in that budget, in both budgets, which both are going to contain some level of reductions. So we just want to make sure we know. And similarly, we're setting up times at each of our schools to be able to talk directly with staff about what's important with them about the budgets and what they're hoping to see as well. So we want to make sure that we're including an opportunity for voice as we develop 2, you know, challenging preliminary budgets that we're presenting in January. So more to come on that. Just want to say Happy Hanukkah to those of you that celebrate. Tonight is the beginning of Hanukkah, and I'm thrilled you're here with us celebrating. You know, the Hanukkah is the Jewish 8-day festival of lights. So yesterday, some of the students in the Jewish Student Union at the high school worked for hours in the high school kitchen to prepare Hanukkah potato latkes, which were shared with students today during the lunch period. This was an extremely expositive experience for the students and a great way for our students to share some of their culture and traditions with the school. Computer Science Education Week is from December 4th through 10th. We strongly encourage students at all of our grade levels to participate in the Hour of Code, which has become a worldwide movement with over 180 countries and millions of students taking an hour out of the week to spend time learning about and engaging in coding. Our digital literacy coaches shared with educators a number of resources at all grade levels to use in the classroom with students. This includes lessons for introducing computer programming and coding, videos, slides to share with students through Google Classroom, and many choices for activities, both high and low tech. Crossing guards, I just want to make a note on crossing guards. Due to staffing vacancies, we have been unable to fill all of our crossing guard positions in the locations this school year. At the beginning of the school year, we had been providing Acton police officers at locations that we couldn't staff. That was mostly as people learn new traffic patterns. That's not a sustainable piece of our budget to be able to continue. We are continuing to work to try and hire the crossing guard positions. At this point, though, I just want to give a big thanks to the Acton and Boxborough police departments, because we're no longer funding those positions, but they have agreed to cover them as much as possible through their shift details. You know, we know there's times when officers who are on detail are going to get called away, and that might leave a location uncovered, but they do try to cover those to the extent possible. So we just also want to just encourage, if anyone does want to become a crossing guard, you can apply on our website. Some quick thanks and Thanksgiving basket support for Blanchard families. We're really grateful for their generosity. I want to congratulate Blanchard grade 6 science teacher Danielle Fredericks. She was recently notified that her work was featured in volume 45, number 6, for those of you counting, issue of the National Science Teachers Association journal Science Scope. The focus of her work was broadening the pathways of engineering education through integration with social studies. We're also pleased to announce that the district was recently awarded $63,203 from the FY24 Teacher Diversification Pilot Program. These funds are used to expand efforts to diversify our workforce here at AB. Thank you in particular to Andrew Shen and Jen Faber for their efforts in applying for that competitive grant. It's also that time of year when the weather gets cold during parent pickup. Attorney General's office has just asked us to remind families and staff of the dangers of idling vehicles. So we will send out information from the Attorney General's office reminding parents of that. Enough said on that.
Thank you, Peter. I'll just put a plug in here for the AB Food Service social media accounts. You can get some of the highlights of the latke production from today if you follow them on social media. Any other questions or comments for Peter on his update? None? Okay, thank you. On to our first presentation of the evening, a social emotional learning update from Heather Stouch. Hi, Heather, welcome. Yeah. There you go. Oh, wow. That's new.
Oh, thanks, man. It's magic. I am Heather Stouch. I'm the coordinator of SEL and mental and behavioral health for the district. And I just wanted to come tonight and talk about some of the targeted focus we have in this area across the district this year. So, I wanted to start by briefly going over some work that was done last year in the 2022-23 school year. We had an SEL Competency Advisory Committee that was pulled together. There was a cross-representation, cross-disciplinary representation from K through 12, where we took the mission statement, core values of the district and of the building schools, individual schools, and pulled out what we thought was represented in terms of the targeted SEL skills that we would like to see develop over the course of our students' experience here at AB. The resulting list were these 8 areas that are shown on the slide deck here. Then that committee worked together to identify a SEL framework from which we could all build out our programming so that we had a common language and targets that encompassed all of these 8 different areas. Ultimately, that committee came to the decision to recommend the CASTLE framework. For those of you that are familiar, it's the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning. It is a widely used framework across the nation, and it is actively supported by DESE, and DESE pulls off a lot of their resources and SEL from the CASEL framework. This framework was recommended and approved by both the district level mental health leadership team and the senior leadership team. And it provides a lot of different resources, research, collaborative opportunities, and implementation guidance through their platform. So this year we began to roll out the CASEL framework K-12. And what we started with in August was the coordinator of early childhood, myself, and the 6 elementary principals had all certified staff, as well as many of our central office staff, present at a professional development where we began the conversation around the CASEL framework, identifying the 5 competency areas: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And it was sort of the foundational work for, as we move through the course of this year, to build out staff understanding of this framework and how this framework can play out in the different key settings which are noted in those, which are represented in the blue circles around that graphic. So classrooms, schools, families, and communities. This work is being continued at the building level, led by building level leadership, working with the staff to build their knowledge. They're using their professional development time in part to reflect, to learn about these competency areas, reflect in their own skills and trajectory in the development of skills in this area, how they might model these skills for the students and how they might integrate them into their classroom settings and their school environments. So the building principals were asked to share some of the areas that they are highlighting specifically over the course of this year within their building. This graphic doesn't represent everything they're doing, nor does it mean necessarily that they're not doing other pieces that are represented there. But they are all basing their work within the CASEL framework. They all are at some level using responsive classroom. Some are really digging into the responsive classroom and structures that we discussed last year. And others are using the different building-wide acronyms and like SOAR at Douglas, STAR values at Blanchard, the unteasables. They're using this to integrate into their building communities. At the secondary level, the RJ Gray and the high school are continuing with their advisory programs this year. There are some similarities across those 2 programs in that they both focus largely on community and building relationships. They both meet weekly. The RJ Gray moved to twice a week this year. Both programs are in the 2nd year. Both collect student feedback and adjust their programming based on that feedback. And both have designed a structure in which the group that they begin with at the start of school in that building, they continue with that group throughout the course of their experience in that building. They do have slightly different focus at each building level. RJ Gray is also identifying one of the CASEL competencies for a monthly school-wide theme and using the advisories and other programming within the building to really highlight that competency area. The other thing that we're moving forward with this year, the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. This is the 5th year in which the district is participating in this survey. It's a survey that is done every 2 years. The Youth Risk Behavior Survey at the base level is put out by the CDC. It is highlighted through DESE, our local partnership, and a large chunk of the funding that we use in order to administer here in the district comes through our partnership with Emerson Health. So we work with Emerson Health, and they subsidize along with 10 other area districts in administering this survey. It is an anonymous survey. Grades 6 and then 8 through 12 participate. And the data is collated, presented back to us, and then we present it to the community. And we also use that information that we attain from that survey to help inform different decisions around, like in the past, we've integrated it into some of our homework policy conversations, our school start time conversations, professional development decisions, things like that. Budget implications. So in the near term, we would like to continue with some of our professional development that we are currently doing. We are also currently in district, we have a SEL and bullying prevention program committee that is currently working to identify a bullying prevention program that we could use here in district from K to 12. And then the elementary school, trying to identify or start to examine the possibility of using an SEL screening tool on a more broad basis in order to gain more data for our decisions on moving programs forward. Financially, the impact would be in the training, whether it's staff time allocation or bringing in experts to speak to some of the programs. Curriculum materials, which some of them, if they're online access, would have some associated annual fees. And then the screening tool costs with tech support and tech updates and additional costs of actually purchasing the screening tool itself. Possible funding resources that we're exploring is grants, reallocation of existing funding, and then considerations for phased implementation, and not all at the one time. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Heather. Questions? Vikram?
What is at-risk behavior? What does that actually consist of? Could you break that down, please?
Yeah, so some of the topics that are covered in the Risk Youth Behavior Survey. Sure. So they do bullying, harassment, substance use, alcohol, sleep hygiene, resiliency, levels of anxiety, depression, relational violence. Those are some of the big topics.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ben?
Thank you, Adam. Could you go into more detail regarding advisory at the RJ Gray program and the impacts that holding advisory weekly has had on the student body?
So I can talk a little bit high level, and then more specifically, I can get you more information from Jim on the data they collected. But what they found when they did the surveys last year was that it was largely having, there was a lot of positive feedback from the students around just their experiences, which was led into part of the decision to increase it to twice a week. So it's now twice a week for 20-minute sessions. And they're also finding that it is increasing the sense of community at large, and providing a space for students to connect with each other and also just share more in their concerns and address and go through process their experiences as a student or within the community. It just provides a natural space for them to dialogue. Yeah.
Leela?
What on earth? Okay. Thank you for your presentation. I had a couple of questions. The first one being, through some of my other work, transformative SEL has come up as something that's been really helpful, especially as student bodies diversify. Is that something that we're doing here? I don't know that I saw that.
So SEL as a field has a lot of different definitions. So can you tell me what you mean by transformative SEL so that I can answer?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty big and broad, but I think Castle has like web pages about transformative SEL, but basically it explores identity in relationship to social emotional learning and how like who you are as a person integrates into that, but there's a bunch of other,
Sure.
I'm not an expert at all.
So from that lens, yes, and I can't speak to it as much in detail at the secondary level. I'd have to get that information for you. I do know that they do identity work. I just am not as familiar with it. They also, in the elementary school, start the year on their relationship building and their identity work, and then over the course of the year, integrate that work that they did on themselves in relation to building empathy for others and the relationship of how that interacts with one another.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then my other question was around the Youth Risk Behavior Survey. So I know that it comes from the state and also CDC, but do we have any input into the questions that we're asking, or are we not using kind of a more specialized version?
No, we do some. We have, there's a committee through Emerson Health that has input into the questions that are put out through the Emerson Health. So there's a standard survey put out by the CDC. Emerson Health Coalition can choose to implement whichever questions they feel are appropriate for their communities. So there is a committee of that all of the districts that are putting into Emerson Health are represented and make those decisions together around which questions.
Other questions? I have a quick one. Heather, first, thank you for sharing the sort of the financial impacts of this work. I think it's important work, but also there are clearly some impacts there. And my question is around whether or not any of the work that we're doing with SEL, particularly with rolling it out in any of the schools, is any of that work stipended today? So we know that we've got some other opportunities for staff can take on additional responsibilities and get a stipend for that. Is there anything that we're doing inside the SEL curriculum that is a stipended position?
No.
Okay.
You mean similar to like the CRTL?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, great. Any last questions from the committee? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. Next item on our agenda is the School Resource Officer Program Recommendation. This is a first read, so I'll hand it off to Rebeccah, who has been chairing the SRO subcommittee this year, to sort of give us an intro. I think Peter will have a couple comments as well, and then I'll sort of give everybody the context as we get through all that information.
All right. The SRO subcommittee was made up of members with a diversity of perspectives on policing in schools. We spent months collecting and reviewing data as well as personal experiences. We met with the police and a juvenile justice expert to gain insight into the program both historically and present day. Though it was not a perfect process, we did ultimately come to a consensus around continuing the program. The new state MOU is quite thorough, seeking to address many of the concerns that we had about the program. The process to develop the MOU included many stakeholders, including juvenile justice experts, who have a deep knowledge about the impacts of policing on the student population. In reviewing this MOU, the subcommittee sought to recommend additions that would increase transparency and accountability and ensure the SROs take a progressive approach to training and community building. It is likewise vital that our policy is detailed enough to ensure everyone is aware of the requirements, because though one SRO might be a stellar asset to the schools, another could be a bad apple that sours the entire program. Ultimately, it will be up to the police to prove their good intent and take the necessary steps to rebuild community trust. The school committee and district are committed to oversight and protecting students and will not be moving forward with blinders on. We will be conducting periodic reviews of the program, as well as collecting data around student interactions with the SROs. I also feel it necessary to point out the history of the SRO program in Acton-Boxborough can be found on the district website, along with all information collected throughout the subcommittee process. The town of Acton pays for the SRO program, having taken over the cost in 2008. There would be no savings for the district in ending the program, and no money to replace it with licensed mental health care workers. It is clear from the data we collected over the course of these many months that there is real harm caused by the presence of police in schools. Every student has the right to a sense of belonging, and not every student feels comfortable with police in their school. We need to listen to their experiences and take them seriously. As our community continues to diversify, it is so, so important that we ensure all students and families feel welcomed, supported, and celebrated. But it is also true that our district is facing an impossible situation right now due to the large budget deficit heading into next year. We need more mental health professionals in our schools and more resources. And those cost money, and we all know times are desperate. District staff needs support to keep kids safe, and we intend to ensure they have the resources they need to continue their work. So we're asking the school committee tonight to vote for these recommendations to supplement the new MOU with the Acton Police Department. In the list of recommendations, you'll find a call for the police to provide quarterly data updates, as well as participate in an annual review of the program. We can continue to address concerns throughout the school year as we move forward and continue to improve the program over time. This is a step forward.
Thank you. And I'll take a moment here to thank the work of the School Resource Officer Review Subcommittee. They've met over the past almost a year now to look at all the material, to review the MOU, as Becca said, to meet with experts and local people in the field. And what they've put forward now is a recommendation for us as the school committee. This is ultimately a decision for this body here, the school committee, to decide if we are going to continue with the program. And as a little bit of background, there is a state memorandum of understanding template that we're required to use, and it sets the baseline for what our agreement will be with the police department. But it is just that, it's the baseline. And so the additional document that you saw delivered to you earlier this week and is in the packet now is a list of additional recommendations above and beyond what the MOU holds. And that's what Becca was referring to. There's an additional request there for reporting and accountability. The next step here, obviously, is for us to think about this. Once the program in place, and to instruct the superintendent to go speak with the police departments and to basically negotiate a memorandum of understanding. And the timing here is somewhat important because we're currently working under an outdated and what the state would deem non-compliant memorandum of understanding. And we need to be in compliance, move into compliance, and the goal would be to have that done for the beginning of next school year. So with that, I'll pause and see if there are any questions or comments from the committee. Andrew.
Thanks, and thank you for doing the work on this, Rebeccah, and sharing this. And I was interested when we had the SROs come to speak to us, in particular about data, and you mentioned data being a component of this. What is the gap between the data that had been collected and the data that you hope to collect on a quarterly basis going forward?
I think the data collection is a fairly new aspect that they're doing, and they've also changed how they're even taking the calls to the schools. So now it's all going through dispatch, and so there's a lot more data collection going on, and the school district is also collecting data. So it feels very new going forward that we're just sort of getting started on this process.
So one of the things the police chief and I had worked on, I want to say middle of last year, we implemented a new process for contacting SROs. Prior, it had been typically, you know, a school administrator would contact an SRO directly on their cell phone. And so that data wasn't going through the dispatch office, so there was no official record of things. We made a modification that now when our schools need to contact an SRO, it's done through dispatch. That has actually a more important benefit, and data collection is an added element. The most important benefit is, for some reason, if an SRO was off duty that day, was away on, you know, whether it's training or out of the office, something like that, by calling dispatch, if it's really something urgent, dispatch makes sure the appropriate officer will respond to the school. The other element of that is it allows computer logging of all the calls and the reason for the call, the time, date, everything else within the system, so that it's not ad hoc how it's tracked. So we think that that's a positive step forward.
Other questions? Tori.
I went searching for the MOU earlier and I couldn't find it, so forgive my ignorance, but how are the SROs selected?
I believe that they're volunteers within the department, and then the chief is responsible for deciding if there's a bunch of people that volunteer who signs up. And one question I had was around female officers, because we haven't seen a lot of them. That was an area that he agreed that he was interested in finding a female officer.
So yeah.
So typically what happens is the police post that position internally, and officers on the force are welcome to apply. It is considered a fairly, well-recognized position, I think, on the force. So there's a formal application process that officers go through. The police chief will have some of his internal staff in the process, but then they also reach out to me, and we not a vacant position, and the police chief asked me, and we had a couple of our school staff, including one of the elementary principals, participate in that process to give, the staff voice to that selection.
So I was actually thinking one step further, and I don't know if this is possible, but obviously we have people in our community who are deeply concerned about this, and would it be possible for them to help with that process as well, or provide some feedback? Just a thought.
One aspect to the recommendations is including the community as much as possible, because we want to make sure that all concerns are addressed.
So what I might suggest, Tori, what you have before you are the draft recommendations of the committee, but ultimately the school committee is going to vote on what you want me to go to talk to the chief about. So if that's something that you want me to talk to the chief about, I can certainly do that. I will say, the hiring of officers is a police function, but because it's part of the MOU, we certainly can influence how we would like to see that play out. So I think that's up for your discussion as we go through.
Other comments or questions? Vikram.
So there are many experts that you talked to, right? How many of those were not white?
The lawyer that we had come, Leon Smith, is a black man.
And other than him, everybody else was white?
Vikram, I would invite you to visit the SRO website, which talks about
I don't think it classifies that. That's why I'm asking her directly.
I'm sorry?
I said it doesn't break it down by race who she spoke with, so that's why I'm asking her directly.
It details the membership of the committee and the process that we went through to select that
I
committee.
understand that, but I'd like to know the racial breakdown.
I would invite you to visit that website and look at that.
It's not
Thank
posted
you.
there. Do you have that information? Rebeccah?
I don't think we need to talk about this. We've covered this many times. It's been discussed. It's in the minutes from our meetings. I would invite you to do some research, and if you have that question, then send that over to the
It's not
superintendent.
listed there, which is why I'm asking it, Adam. Thank you.
I understand.
I'm asking actually Rebeccah, not you.
But I'm the chair, and so I'm
Right,
directing
but she
the
was on the
conversation.
committee. You asked me if I had a question, and you're breaking down
As
my
was I.
question. Yes.
Thank you.
So do
Thank
you
you,
have that
Vikram.
information? So you're not providing that? Is that right? You're not providing that to me. Thank you.
At this time, I'm inviting you to review the website, and then if you'd like, you can send a message to
The information is not
myself.
on the website. That's why I'm asking it here.
Okay. So the next step is we're going to vote on this on January 18th, which is not our next meeting, but the meeting following that. So both school committees and members of the public are invited to provide feedback and questions in advance of that. And then we can look at any of the additions or comments to the recommendations. Following that vote, the superintendent will begin negotiations with the police departments. It's my suggestion that as he has those negotiations, he brings back a draft of what the MOU would look like to the school committee prior to finalizing that. And as a reminder, he will need time to complete this and put it into effect for next year. All right. Leela.
Thanks. I just wanted to say that I would love for us to do what Adam just suggested, which is bring a copy of the MOU that kind of is settled on back to the committee. One of the other pieces of information is that Leon Smith, who's the head of Citizens for Juvenile Justice, is a lawyer by training, was also on the committee who developed the model MOU for the state, and he has offered to review our MOU and give us feedback if we wanted it. So I think that would be helpful. He's offering it for free. I think that would be great.
Thank you. All right, on to new business. First item is the student use of electronic communication devices policy. This is a first read on that policy, and I understand that Andrew's going to kick it off, but really hand it over to Liz as the chair of the policy subcommittee.
Only if she wants. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for providing a little bit of time for us to present to you a first read of a draft that the policy subcommittee has worked on over the first part of the school year. It is about student use and access to electronic communication devices. Some of the impetus for this year was that the principals at the elementary level and the administration at the high school, both separately but at the same time, felt compelled to implement a more robust and specific set of expectations around student use and access of electronic communication devices, i.e. cell phones, smartwatches, things like that. And they felt that it would be helpful if the district in general offered some sort of umbrella language that could sort of support and speak to larger themes around their motivation and their intent around their policies. And so we brought it to policy. There was a shared interest in that, and this is the draft that we came up with. A couple of things just to provide you with some context. To Kareen's point, I would actually not disagree that overall this language does not necessarily get super specific and granular. That's actually intentional, not because we wanted to sort of retreat from hard decisions, but because the main intent was to provide, again, like I said, umbrella language around the importance and the recognition that it is important for the reasons stated, to provide limitations and clear restrictions around access and use of electronic communications, but to also allow individual schools at different grade levels and age levels to develop language and expectations that they felt were appropriate for the age, appropriate for the setting, and allow for differences that they felt were important. So again, it wasn't about trying to be wishy-washy, but about allowing for that flexibility and at the same time having a district statement around the philosophy that yes, there are some limitations. As we've developed more research and learned more research, we do think that as much as we want to take advantages of technological advances, the development of adolescents and their brains and the impact of technology needs to be reconciled in those different ways. So I just wanted to mention that piece. A couple other things. Diane Baum, who many of you know as a former school committee member and just someone who has remained involved, she attended one of our subcommittee meetings and she sent us some feedback that was very helpful. One, encouraged us to potentially consider actually making reference to the recent Surgeon General report around the impact of technology on adolescent development. I think that's actually something that we should consider because it really does echo the local sort of concerns and motivation for this work, but then definitely sort of attaches it to something that's very recent and much more known sort of nationally. In addition, and perhaps helpful to Kareen's observation, is that maybe we should also include actual references and links to the individual school policies, just to make sure that people know that this wasn't just sort of lots of words, but in fact, beneath the words, they're actually at the school level explicit policies that state sort of who, what, when, where, how, why, so on and so forth. And then Molly, you had sent an email too, thank you. Some feedback at the high school level just around access and usage in the hallways. Just so you know, the reference in the hallways was not to say that they should be restricted in the hallways, but just to make sure that in policies there's clarity about expectations of whether they're allowed or not. So just that there isn't any ambiguity. Exactly. So it wasn't about saying that they should be restricted, it was just saying here are the different locations where it might be healthy to actually give guidance that's explicit. And so I think that's where we would share with all of you. There's definitely an important bullet point about the importance of having a protocol for exceptions for health-related needs. You know, when I was at the junior high school, we had a handful of those situations every year where, just to give a generic example, we had some students where managing their diabetes involved some technology that also involved access to cell phones and it was a very easy way to have a conversation and then provide for a protocol where those individual students had available access. So I'll sort of leave it there and just offer the opportunity for Liz or Leela or Lakshmi to chime in, and then anybody who have questions, and then we'll go back and we'll wrestle with some of the things that you might have to offer.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you for taking the introduction. You did very well summarize, and actually the notes that I had to get rid of because you said the same thing, same brain.
Great.
The one other thing that I really did want to sort of note is that, we did really look for different inputs, both from the schools and from the community, and we really wanted to include not just a cell phone policy, but there are lots of different wearables. And, I know 7-year-olds that have a smartwatch that is a cell phone, and as time goes on, I think that we really were trying to make a policy that could be more encompassing and more focusing on the social emotional needs of our students.
Leela or Lakshmi, do you guys want to add anything?
Yeah, I was wondering before we vote on this, as the school committee, do the school policies get published that kind of under this umbrella language?
So this will be our first read, and then following the second read, or possibly third, depending on the depth of the changes that are made, once it's voted by the school committee, it gets posted online, and we have our policies online and a service provided by MASC, which also has a lot of other school districts' policies. So yes, once it's voted, it gets posted online as part of our policy manual.
But then, so when we vote on it, we won't necessarily have new policies that we're looking at from the schools, because they will update their policies based on what we put out here.
Okay.
So under this new guideline is when they would then make the tweaks to the documents that we've reviewed in preparing this.
Okay, so I'm trying to address what Corinne said. She wouldn't really see a change yet. She has to wait after the school committee has voted and the school drafts the individual school procedures, right?
Can I talk to that?
Yep.
So, I think this year, our principals had actually raised this issue with us and came forward, and they felt like there was some cell phone use, and it was an increasing amount of cell phone or wearable device use that was having a negative impact on how students engaged in school. That sometimes is in classrooms, but it also can be, especially as students get older, in hallways, common areas of schools, things like that, because of the prevalence of social media. Kids are actually on videos during the day, saying things to each other over, TikTok or whatever, app of the day they use, and then conflict erupts in a school. And that actually is more common than you might expect. And so what the principals really wanted to do was think about starting to have a healthier balance of when cell phones were appropriate and when they're not appropriate. And so a lot of the schools and the elementary principals got together earlier this year, and they wanted a more consistent policy across schools that they could move forward. They've already done that, so that was considered in this. The high school revised its policy. The junior has had a policy where they're just restricted from use during the day anyway. So I think the district policy is a reflection of the direction the schools have been trying to head, and trying to provide a broad umbrella for schools to operate. In general, the way policy works is, you have federal law at the top and everyone has to comply, then state law, which the states have to comply with federal law. District policies have to apply, comply with state law, et cetera, and then the schools have to comply with district policy. So it all feeds down into the schools from that highest level.
So if I understand correctly, we are saying the policies already reflect what the thought process went into this effort, right? So in that case, we are just providing the consistent language for the school district to cover.
Yes, I would say that this language, in our intent and how we drafted it, it just provides an anchor and a reference point for the school's policies that already exist, but then also an encouragement to continue to update it.
Okay.
So, because I do think that when the principals, they did move forward with things that perhaps not everybody agreed with. The elementary school, they, you know, to Kareen's point, they actually did put a pretty explicit stake in the ground saying we really want to restrict technology at a greater level. And if people sort of challenged why at the school level that happened, I think they felt like they wanted to be able to say, well, it is consistent with a larger district approach and mindset around the use of technology. So for all intents and purposes, if you necessarily need to get an update or a notice that we had done this, because I think their policies are already in place.
Okay, thank you.
All right, questions, comments? Tori?
I appreciate the work you guys have all done on this. The struggle is real. The impact is real. I think this is great as written. Stating clear expectations is absolutely key. Enforcing this is so hard. And so my question is, what other resources do our teachers need to be able to focus on learning instead of having to police students with devices?
That's a great question. I think the good news, and we probably should check in, but and Leela, Lakshmi, and Liz certainly chime in if you remember it differently, but when we met with the principals and APs at one of our meetings, they felt that things were going fairly well from their perspective in terms of not only the expectations, but some of the response. Certainly at the high school, I think there was a big cultural change. I think somebody mentioned the phone caddies and things like, I think Molly mentioned the phone caddies and things like that. So clearly, you know, cultural changes take a little bit of time, but they feel like it's gone fairly well. Certainly, I think if they feel like the rate of change slows in a way where they might feel like they need a bit more support, then hopefully that they'll let us know and we can be responsive to it. But at least so far, they felt like it's going in the direction that they would have hoped.
I really appreciate what you guys have written up here also. You know, the things I had going into reading this were saying like, well, what about people that need a device for, you know, translation or some sort of learning need? And what about the future when people are using technology we can't even imagine? But I think the language in here really clearly outlines that both things were taken care of for me. So I think it's good. Thank you.
I have a question. So when the policy goes to the school level, like what does it look like? Who is writing the policies at each school level?
At the elementary levels, the principals jointly updates the student handbook annually. So that's a joint effort at the elementary school. The junior high, it tends to be the junior high administrators, and they would put that in their student handbook. At the high school, and the high school updates their student handbook. That is subject to annual school committee review. So if they do update their handbook this year to adapt different language around the cell phones, it would be something that would actually be presented to this body.
Thank you, everyone, for doing this. I think it's important to look at policy, not prohibit the use of technology. And with absolute respect, Corinne, towards you as a public participant, thank you for coming here. But cell phones are not the devil. They're important. They are very important over the course of multiple aspects of our lives. And as a parent, as separate from any role I have on the school committee, when we lived in a different district, my family and that school community endured 100 threats to the school against our kids' elementary over the course of a single school year. And these threats included like bombs at the school and more. And while the school and the community and the police reacted as best they could to the threats, the families, the students were left flailing. The responses shifted from immediate evacuation to shelter in place to barricading the doors to escalating ALICE training. And each day that passed grew the question, would this be the last one that we see our kids? Every day. Every day we wondered whether that'd be the last time we'd see our kids again, and the fear and the uncertainty and that anger that stemmed from this grew. And ultimately the perpetrator was caught. He's in federal prison. He's got another 12 years left. But for my family, that means we set a new rule for how we dealt with technology. And that means I've got 4 kids, and the eldest kid in every building has a cell phone, and now a cell phone and a watch. And while the devices can be used for a million things, the first reason for our family is to ensure that there's a threat, that if there's a threat, we have an opportunity to talk to them, hopefully to help make sense of whatever the situation is. And maybe for the last time, maybe to say goodbye, but we've been lucky here in Acton. We haven't had these 100 threats. We've had lockdowns, but these events are happening in schools all around the country. And I'm against the prohibition of these technologies because I think managing the use of technologies through policy is the most effective means of controlling misuse. And we live in a world that is increasingly connected. Having a supercomputer in your pocket can help you become a more curious and educated and interesting and productive person. But at the core of this, and the case is something terrible, the technology may be our only connecting thread, and I really think it's important that we keep that there. And policy, in this case, allows us to have that spectrum of communication. So I thank you to the group that did this, the subcommittee. Thank you for looking into this and for having this as the result.
Vikram.
Yeah, I want to piggyback largely off everything that Andrew said. I fully agree with that. And also thank you very much for putting this together. It's very nice. I like the fact that it's left up to the schools individually, that it's not some sort of blanket thing that this is what's happening, right? And it's up to schools to really do that. And really, I mean, phones are not necessarily the devil. I mean, you can immediately find something out that you're curious and you can immediately find the information right there. I mean, so it really is a really strong educational tool. I mean, there's obviously a dark side to it. But I like how this is written. Thank you.
Thank you. Leila.
Yeah, one thing I would just highlight for the committee is the line at the end of the last bullet that says addressing misuse should prioritize educational and restorative messaging. Through our discussions, we had talked about that we really want students to understand why this is happening, and it's not just like we don't think that you should ever use cell phones. But why do we want it to happen? And then when students can't follow through with expectations that have hopefully been clearly outlined, that it's not just kind of a one strike and you're out, but that there's opportunities for students to shift behavior or engage in a conversation about why they might not be able to, not have their phone out. So I just wanted to highlight that for the committee.
Thank you.
So this question is for Leila. I know when we talked about that restorative messaging, we were going to come up with a language that would be consistent district-wide, not just for cell phone usage, but did we do that, or are we waiting to?
Can you repeat the question? Are you asking, have we come up with a definition of restorative across the district?
Yeah.
The answer would be no, I don't think necessarily. Okay. I think it's a fair point. I think that though this is piece of a bigger conversation around what our restorative practices look like, and I think that that conversation is ongoing. I think we could certainly have a conversation within policy sub about what we put in specific to this policy, but I think your potentially bigger point is fair, and I think it's an important one that we should be having a discussion and coming to agreement around what restorative looks like.
Yeah, because I think it's beyond, not just the cell phone use. I think it's beyond that, yeah. Thanks.
Just, one thought, Leila, and I had mentioned this when, probably a year and a half ago when we started the SRO discussion, that I actually think it would be healthy for school committee to think of an overarching discipline policy for the district that's rooted in restorative practices. I actually think that could go a long way. And so I would just maybe think about that on the radar for policy sub at some point. We had looked into, some quality restorative practices training. I think one of the prohibitive features of it right now is to do it well is costly in terms of the trainings that are available. So we did not proceed with it this year because of the cost. We just didn't have money in the budget for it. So that is going to be a longer term project for us. But I do think, starting with a good statement of policy, discipline laws have shifted so tremendously in the last 2 years that I actually think a lot of the expectations even that families have are of, ways that actually even under the law currently are no longer legal around student discipline. And so there's a gap in terms of community understanding of how schools approach discipline that would be healthy to just have an overarching policy which schools can then align to.
Okay. I have a bit of feedback, and I think, Andrew, you covered a bit of it in the beginning with some of the comments from Diane. What I miss here is context and almost what's the committee's goal with the policy. What is it that's, what we're saying is, hey, these are interesting devices. We need to provide guidance and limitations, and okay, schools go figure out what you want to do. And I think that there's missing a piece of context there that's somewhere between you must do this and nothing. And I think we're more on the nothing side than we are on the you must do this side. And I think we're missing a paragraph that just sort of talks about what publicly is available around the research, showing the use of these devices, both from the positive and the negative side, so that there's at least some context there for the public to see, but then also some context for the administrators, because I feel, it could be challenging for the administrators to come up with a policy that aligns, first of all, across 6 elementary schools, which they'll have to agree upon, but then to have a sort of a logical progression as you move through the schools. So that was my bit of takeaway from this. But again, I would extend my thanks, as everyone else has, to the subcommittee for the work on this.
I think a preamble is something that we had toyed with, and I think is probably, including Diane's comment, probably could be an anchoring of not only what we are asking, but why we are asking in the aspiration. I just think the reluctance was that I've gotten feedback from the chair before about my wordiness, so I tried to keep it short.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
So, come on, mixed messages here, Adam. But I think given that Surgeon General report, that does give us the introduction to a preamble that might be useful.
Perfect. All right, so thanks again to the policy subcommittee. This goes back to you probably for some edits, and then back to us when you're ready for a second read and potentially a vote. Okay, on to ongoing business. So first item on the ongoing business is a school committee communication goal update. So I've got a couple items here that I want to reference. First of all, I want to highlight that on our January 4th meeting, we'll have a representative from the campaign finance, Office of Campaign Finance from the Commonwealth here to provide a training for both the school committee and any members of any elected officials in the town of Acton regarding campaign finance laws and requirements. This is important because as elected officials, we have access to public funds. Our emails, accounts, all of the stuff that we're doing here is considered public funds, and we are going to be going up with a ballot question that some people will need to or may be asked to advocate for. And so we need to be very careful about how we go about doing that advocating and doing that either on a public use of public funds while doing that, which is essentially prohibited. So we're going to have a training on the 4th for that, but I just want everyone to be aware first of all, of that date, and second of all, that there's definitely some things that we need to be cautious of as we are both often, let me see, many of us are parents in the district as well as elected officials, so be aware of that. The next item is I'm looking for some help, someone to volunteer to help prepare sort of a fact sheet or talking points around our current budget situation. So we have, Andrew. Great. So here's the idea. We have a lot of moving parts to the budget this year. There's a lot of information that changes essentially very quickly, and there's a lot of, I don't want to say misinformation, but confusion in the public around what's going around. And what I would love for us to be able to do as committee members is have a list of talking points that's very factual. How did we get here? What has happened to get us to this point? And what are some of the plans to sort of get through this, and what are the next steps? And so, Andrew, we'll talk with you. We can maybe put this on our next budget sub agenda, and then, essentially just a quick FAQ sheet that everyone on the committee can have handy, so that when you're around town and you're talking to people, that would be something that you could share and be able to provide facts with. Yeah, Vikram.
I think we should probably involve CPAC with this. I was at the meeting last night, and they're a core piece of this. So I think communicating with them would probably be a good idea.
Sure. Yep. And so that's the first thing. So the goal here, we'll ask, thank you, Andrew, for volunteering for that. We'll put together an FAQ, and then we'll provide that to the public as a whole, but also for all the school committee members. And the point here is to encourage us as school committee members, when we're having those conversations, to really feel empowered to speak up about the facts around what's happening here. Because obviously we're vessels to take in input from the community, but we also have a wealth of knowledge where we can share some of the information about what's going on. I'm looking also for just additional ways to be able to engage with the public. Again, we're getting into a point where we're talking about a very challenging budget. There's going to be a lot of moving pieces. A couple ideas that I have in my head is trying to set up office hours for school committee members, finding either a public location, town halls, libraries, what have you, where you're just available for an hour or two at various times during the day individually, so that someone who's got a question can come find you and you can have some of those conversations. A lot of what we're doing right now can't be sort of explained in 2 bullet points. You've got to have a bit of a meaningful conversation. So that's one idea I have. Another is, and Peter's been successful with this in the past, and I think it's something that the committee should do directly as well, which is reaching out to the seniors in both communities, finding some time when the senior centers are having some activities, and again, making ourselves visible and aware there, so that the seniors and those folks who are going to be asked to potentially spend a lot more of their fixed income can really sort of give us some questions and ideas. And again, the point here is that we're facing a very challenging budget situation, and there are no bad ideas. We want to collect all those ideas. We want to hear them. We want to be receptive to the community, bring them to Peter, say, hey, someone talked about this, that, or the other thing. This is the point where we need to be thinking creatively. Advocating for or against a ballot question, but we're here to provide information and sort of answer questions, be available to the community. Tori.
So I feel like we're starting to do the beginning work of what I've seen other communities do in informing citizens about their overrides, which is providing a website that you can actually land on. And I think there's probably something we can draw off of that, and we're probably going to have to team up with the town leadership as well. One of the key things that needs to be in there once we have an idea of what the A budget and what the B budget looks like is being able to have a calculator for people to plug in, this is my address, what is the impact on me? Because right now we're talking about medium home prices, we're talking about things that are sort of intangible, and we're still floating numbers. We haven't really figured out what that other budget looks like and what the size of things are. So there's probably an as of date on anything that we put out, because it's going to continue to change.
Thank you. All right, so what I would be curious to know is if anybody is interested to set up office hours. Great. So Ben and Rebeccah and Yanshin, Vikram, Tori. So what really trying to figure out how do we coordinate without coordinating, right?
You can actually.
We can plan.
Open meeting law allows you to coordinate calendar events.
Okay.
By email. That is absolutely acceptable.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Leela, sorry, I'm saying Leela, but I'm looking at Yanshin. Yanshin, if you can coordinate with the town of Acton to find a location, either an office at the town hall or at the library, and just get a set of hours, and then share that with the committee in terms of when there are available hours, and we'll have a sign-up sheet for committee members to have open office hours. And then, one second. Vikram, if you could do the same with the town of Boxborough, either in town hall or again at the library there, and share that with the Boxborough members around what are some times we can get some space, and then we'll sign up for those, and then we'll publish those in terms of our open office hours. Leela and then Tori.
Just at the solarium in the Acton Library might be a good idea, because it's right adjacent to like the children's area, so if kids need to go run around, that's okay.
Excellent. explanatory.
And also, do we look at teaming with some of our friends from town of Acton and town of Boxborough at some point?
At some point, I think so. I think right now, really what I want the school committee to be out there to sort of talk about the schools, and that we need to be able to provide that information. And then there's going to be another step of this, which is what is the Acton sort of need in terms of budget and how that happens.
And what about any virtual? Not everybody can walk in.
Virtual office hours. I need to think about that one some more and think about what sort of method we would use for that. I want to start with some physical ones, see what times we have, and then let's see, I would again share anybody who's watching this online or in the room, send us some feedback if there's a request for some virtual or certain times that are beneficial. I think we want to be available to the public.
So I've been asked, and I've done story times for AML, Acton Memorial Library. Can we do story time plus FAQ, or is it not kosher?
Can we have all of our conversations done in children book format? No?
If only I
Okay.
could rhyme like Dr. Seuss, I would.
You also said to come find us. Can this be a scavenger hunt?
Oh, I don't think scavenger hunts are really good. I think, Yenshin, if there's published times where there's children's book readings that are available and we happen to have our office hours around the same time in roughly the same building, that would be wonderful. Exactly. And then any volunteers to work with the councils on aging in both towns to make some arrangements to go meet with seniors? All right, so thank you to Lakshmi for Boxborough. Anybody from Acton? Rebeccah will. Wonderful. Thank you all. I really appreciate that. Any other comments or questions sort of on our school committee communication goal? I'm going to go to Liz and then...
Sorry, just sort of planting the seed in the back of everyone's mind. If there's any other, so I know we've talked about Council on Aging, but if there are any other, similar groups in your community that you're thinking, oh, they might benefit from something like this, certainly I would recommend just letting Adam know, so that way maybe we could coordinate something with them as well.
I mean, like Lunar New Year is coming up in a few months.
Anybody else? Leela.
Just wanted to remind folks that we got an email inviting us to Proscenium Circus's show. That's tonight and then tomorrow and Saturday. I'm going to tomorrow's, but just a reminder that there was an email sent on December 1st.
76 trombones. We'll be marching down the aisles. Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, since I was the one who brought up Lunar New Year, so
Yeah.
if more than 4 of us attend a single event, is that, no?
No, you can attend anything you want as a school committee. The open meeting law applies to meetings where you're deliberating about something. So, and there are exceptions even within that, like if we brought in a training for school committee members, that wouldn't have to be conducted in public. However, like if you can all go to the same event, you can email around calendaring, that's okay too. You just can't talk about school committee business that comes before the committee at events.
Any last questions or comments on this? Great. Thank you for those who volunteered. I'll follow up with an email to sort of confirm that, and then we'll start to make some plans. Excuse me. Next item on the agenda is a discussion around the withdrawal of funds from the OPEB trust to pay our FY24, that's this year's health insurance costs. Peter, I think you're going to give us a little update here, and just a heads up, we will have to take a fairly prescribed vote that will be a roll call vote.
All right, so first, welcome back, everyone. So we've been talking about health insurance trust now over, evolving really over probably the last 6 weeks or so. You heard from Steve Noon the status of health insurance trust when he presented, and then a week later, they found out they had $3.2 million in claims came in over a 6-month period from a relatively small number of individuals, and not enough money in the trust to pay those claims. We do know that this is going on in health insurance trusts across the state right now, and it's particularly impacting smaller trusts. Because the Acton Health Insurance Trust is a small self-insured trust that only has 2 entities, us and the town of Acton. It's a very small risk pool, and that means that when significant things happen, there's significant consequences. One other example of a trust that is also struggling right now and is actually disbanding is the Minuteman Neshoba Health Insurance Trust. That impacts towns like Concord, Carlisle, the town of Boxborough. Case Collaborative was part of that, among a handful, half a dozen of other communities. They experienced similar types of claims that were coming in. It's a pattern post-pandemic of deferred health care that is resulting in more acute and costly services that need to be provided, is what we've gathered from the consultant. The net impact of that was that there was insufficient cash on hand in the trust to pay the amount of claims that have come in. In order to stabilize the trust has taken 2 actions. One is to request a $2 million one-time payment, which is a loan, from the school district and the town of Acton. The second is a 22.8% rate increase effective January 1st of this year that continues through the end of this year and is continuing into next year. There is some wiggle room that in March they're going to, verify those rates, but they anticipate that the 22.8% will continue. In terms of funds for this year, our staff worked with the town of Acton to determine the appropriate cost share of the $2 million that was being requested. We went on the total value of the premiums that were being paid by employees of the 2 entities and retirees of the 2 entities. It comes out that the district has approximately, I'm going to say approximately, the district has 77.45% of that share. That's not really approximate, which equals $1.549 million of the $2 million one-time payment. In addition, the rate increase from January to July, the district's share of that is $1.201,583. And as you know, and we mentioned earlier, the school committee did agree in return for our unions agreeing to bargain over longer-term cost savings, which we do hope to exceed the value of what we're spending. But it did agree to cover the employee share of that, which is $407,604. So there's multiple steps that are going to have to be taken by the committee. One part of the funding plan for that, which we've shared with you previously, was to withdraw a reimbursement of last year's retiree health care expenses from the OPEB trust. That's one step. That is $2,053,241. In addition, we have $675,000 in the operating budget that would have been paid to OPEB for quarters 2, 3, and 4 of our FY24 OPEB contribution. That will, we're going to come back to you and request a vote to do a line item transfer of that so that we can pay and redirect those funds to the Acton Health Insurance Trust. And additionally, what we're doing now is trying to finalize what percentage of this might need to be, well, not might, will need to come from excess and deficiency, in which case we'll come to you, and that would be a revote of a budget at a higher amount with the use of excess and deficiency to offset the difference so there's no impact to the 2 town assessments. That vote will trigger notification to the Acton-Boxborough select boards, at which point the select boards consider that and determine whether or not to call a town meeting. So we'll certainly work with them. I am having, conversation with the town manager tomorrow around this. Want to make sure that we're on the same timeline. So if the town's funding model for this requires a town meeting vote, we want to make sure we provide them enough notice of our change so that they can include that in whatever town meeting vote goes forward as well. We just want to make sure that we're aligned and we don't cause the town of Acton any challenges in terms of how that's funded. So, the vote tonight, Adam has the motion and language, but essentially what we're looking to do is to make clear that you're voting to withdraw the funds from the OPEB trust, and that will allow our treasurer to make that withdrawal, probably starting tomorrow. She'll work on the paperwork for that. And then, you know, it's also authorizing me to pay our share of the $2 million loan to Health Insurance Trust. It will also authorize me to pay the two different premiums that have been agreed to. So that's really what we're looking for tonight, and I will turn it back to Adam.
Thanks, Peter. Before we go to questions, I just want to provide a little context in terms of timeline, because, again, this has been moving quickly. So at our last meeting, we did have an executive session, and we shared in the public portion of that meeting that inside executive session, we had agreed to cover the January premium for the district employees. And then there was also additional conversation regarding potential negotiations with the unions, and part of that was also then to include the additional or the remaining 5 months worth of health insurance costs. And I can understand from a public point of view, it seems like a lot of things were happening behind closed doors or weren't clear to the public. Ultimately, this is just a matter of timing in terms of when we can have our public meetings and when we're able to share this and what happens with protected negotiations that we have, and then how that's presented to the public, and being sensitive to the employees and letting them know that they would be cared for the balance of this year. So there was a vote inside executive session to also carry the remaining 5 months of premiums for the district employees. So that's a sort of a bit of context in terms of the timeline. As Peter mentioned, the balance of funds that are required, that are outside of what we'll take from our OPEB reimbursement, will at some point have to come from our excess and deficiency fund, which will require a vote and a revote of our budget. And Peter sort of laid out some of that timeline there. From a cash flow perspective, we've got enough money to cover that for a while, so we won't need to take the E&D vote immediately, but as to Peter's point, we'll align with the town to make sure that that is then another vote that comes in front of this committee and that is publicly available for everybody to understand sort of what's happening there and where the balances have landed. So I think I've provided a little bit more context in terms of timing and how how this has worked from the committee's perspective. I see Lakshmi has a question.
So the way I understand as a layperson is we're taking money from one trust to pay for a problem with another trust, right? So what are the short-term consequences and the long-term consequences? And the question number 2 is there an authoritative financial entity that can certify that the consequences are as we all think they are? So rather than us certifying that that's what it is.
Sherry, do you want, I mean, I can provide a little context, but do you want to talk to that?
You're talking about the consequence of pulling the funding from the OPEB trust. So we have checked with the actuary and we have checked with the other investors, and we will not be penalized. It's a one-time withdrawal, so they have guaranteed that we will not be penalized for pulling that out. It just, right now, I think we had about 40 more years before we're fully funded. So by pulling this out, it just probably changes the 40 to 42 years.
So going back on that, yes, 40 years, but we're not sure if this won't keep repeating, right? So when does that stop? When do we think this is the threshold after which we can't do this anymore? If we are in the same situation?
So the question, if I understand, is how many times can we go back to the OPEB well to fix some of these issues before we can't do it anymore?
Yeah, and at what point does things really come back to bite us?
I think it's a good question. I want to provide one piece of context before I maybe turn it over to Sherry to answer that. And right, the OPEB fund, and I'll have all of the people smarter here keep me honest, it's a trust that is in place to cover the retiree health expenses that the district provides. What we do right now is we pay for those out of our operating budget, and we fund this trust so that at some theoretical point in the future, 40, 45, 90 years, there's enough money in that trust to be able to do that. We have the right, as I understand, to withdraw funds from that trust as a reimbursement for what we paid last year for retiree health insurance. So we could continue to do that, assuming that the the reimbursements are permitted to cover those costs until we run that trust dry, and then we just stretch out the time until, once again, we have fully funded that trust to be able to cover those costs. So please clarify my understanding.
No, that's actually an accurate understanding of it. I will say, we actually spoke with the actuary about this, as well as our OPEB trust advisor. And, you know, there are other towns that actually do this on a regular basis, where they withdraw retiree health insurance to recoup that cost. They would strongly advise that this is not a regular occurrence. The, you know, greatest impact, I think, that we run a risk of, in addition to kind of thinking about like the OPEB trust, is in terms of bond rating. And if you continually pull out of your OPEB trust because you're not funding other areas, that will eventually impact your bond rating and your ability to borrow money at you know, prevailing rates. The advisor did tell us that a one-time withdrawal would not trigger a change in a bond rating. That's more of a pattern of withdrawals. But I will also say that as E&D, you know, gets depleted, that's probably an equal or greater risk of a change in bond rating. So, you know, we're in a dangerous position as a district from a finance standpoint, and, you know, our reserves are depleted. We're, you know, running into challenging budgets. I think, you know, I talked to a finance committee member in between meetings, and, you know, they said, well, geez, you know, withdrawing from OPEB is a bad idea. And I said, I completely agree with you. There are no good ideas left. Is the challenge that we have. And if we didn't use the OPEB account, we would not have enough cash on hand between our operating budget and excess and deficiency to pay this. So it really is a last resort that we have to look at to try and get through this.
So can we summarize this as the only resort to pay this expense at this point? Is this the only way to pay the current expense? We have
mechanism that we have.
Okay, thank you.
My understanding is Health Insurance Trust requesting that $2 million as a loan, right? So in theory, they'd pay it back when the times are better. So at that time, can we put the $2 million back into the OPEB trust?
Yeah, I mean, I think our full intention as an administration is that, you know, we're not getting the full $2 million back because we're taking $2 million out, but 1.5 million is the actual loan to HIT. So that's the amount we would get back. Our intention as an administration is whatever we loan out that's taken from OPEB should go directly back to OPEB. You know, John Peterson always would. So that's always the caution. So the committee has to remain, you know, conservative in that approach long term, but that is the intent.
So just to reiterate here, so essentially this is a loan that we're going to have to pay back to it in better times. But you're saying it would push it out, say, from like 40 years to 42 years, right? Given the amount that we're facing, right, for this, is it possible to take out more than this and allocate those funds elsewhere? That's just strictly no.
No, because you can only be reimbursed from the trust for last year's expenses on retiree health insurance. So we are taking out the maximum reimbursement.
Other questions or comments? Okay, so what's going to happen next is I'm going to say, I will entertain a motion, and then I'm going to read a whole bunch of language, and then someone is going to say so moved, and they will be the person who actually made the motion, and then we'll need someone to second it, and then we'll go around and do a roll call vote. So I will entertain a motion to authorize the district treasurer to withdraw $2,053,241 from the OPEB trust account and to authorize the superintendent to pay $1,549,000 to the Health Insurance Trust and pay the district and employee share of the health insurance rate increase through June 30th, 2024, as described in the treasurer's memo.
So moved.
Second.
Did you get that? Ben and Tori. And we're going to do a roll call vote. Vikram.
Yes.
Leela.
Yes.
Tori.
Yes.
Liz.
Yes.
Rebecca.
Yes.
Yanshin.
Yes.
Andrew.
Yep.
Lakshmi.
Yes.
And Ben.
Begrudgingly, yes.
And myself, yes, so that is unanimous. Thank you all. Okay, let's just continue down this conversation and get an update on the health insurance trust from, I'm not sure which Andrew is giving the health insurance update.
So
okay.
it's Andrew Schwartz, actually. However, as you know, Julie's out for the month of December, and so you're looking at the person who's now responsible for, answering her emails and developing agendas. So there's wild inaccuracies. So my apologies.
Cool.
Andrew up on it. You can just take him up.
Meeting I've been in. Yeah, so we've met a lot over the course of the last 6 weeks. An interesting piece is that at the same time that we're going through all of our tying knots together, our consultants that we were working with have left the organization that we were working with. Gallagher has provided us with a new team to be able to help us figure out the way out of this. As we're going through the stuff that Peter's talked about and the vote that we've just gone through, we're also looking at other options that may allow us to have better opportunities to operate the provision of health insurance for those we care for and those that we employ going into the next year. We are currently looking through other options to continue the trust with better rates, to go out of this trust into a different type of collaborative, to look at other collaboratives that are out there and potentially bring other groups into this trust. That analysis is undergoing currently, and we will not expect to see something like that until after the first of the year. We'll bring back that information at that time to be able to give everyone an opportunity to understand what our next steps are. Our next meeting, I believe, is it may have one more meeting in December depending upon quorum, but we'll have one in January, and we'll continue to keep this group updated on an ad hoc basis.
Thanks, Andrew. Given the importance here, are there any questions or comments? We have some additions from the superintendent.
I think one of the things that, I've talked with the town manager about, and, also, I was going to say Andrew S., but that's not even sufficient. Andrew Schwartz about, as well as Steve Noon and Andrew Shen, and our unions, I think we have a couple interests. One is reducing costs longer term, but the other is also minimizing this type of risk from coming up again. And so, as much as we want to, think about how Acton Health Insurance Trust can continue to provide good, affordable rates as it had for the past 20 plus years, there's a risk that can continue to be associated with that small pool of risk. We're also looking at some of the larger groups. The GIC is a typical one that communities may look at. Unfortunately, they had a December 1st notification period for the following July, and you had to have already shown that you had negotiated for 30 days prior to moving into that. And the HIT issue didn't surface early enough for us to be able to move on that. We did authorize Gallagher to release all of our claims information to Maya, and try and they're the other really large insurer pool. So we're actively exploring Maya. We're certainly going to see what other options Gallagher comes back with that might be appropriate, that lessen the risk and provide, more cost-effective insurance. But we really have to keep in mind two things: risk mitigation, which is really what's biting us now, and improving on a 22.8% rate increase that resets a base for a long time to come. So, those are our two big goals in looking at health insurance.
Thanks, Peter. Other questions or comments? Okay. Next update is from the Capital Subcommittee. Ben.
Thank you. On November 22nd, the Acton-Boxborough Regional School Committee's Capital Improvement Subcommittee held a Zoom meeting with a comprehensive discussion on the priority needs of the district. Staff member Mark Hamill highlighted a pipe leak in the administrative building necessitating a $20,000 to $25,000 repair. Urgent heating system upgrades were outlined for the Parker Damon building, the junior high school, and the administration building. The estimated spending through the year was discussed with confirmation of having sufficient funds to cover both Parker Damon and junior high school repairs. Concerns about general fund freezes and the challenging school budget situation were raised, prompting a focus on immediate priorities. Superintendent Light emphasized the importance of maintaining capital spending, especially for high-priority projects like the high school rooftop units. The meeting also touched upon potential override impacts and the status of the Conant project, and the Acton Fuel Depot was also mentioned too during the course of the discussion. The meeting concluded with a unanimous vote to adjourn. The next meeting is scheduled for December 13th, I believe.
Thank you, Ben. All right, now I'm going to just hand over control of the meeting for the next 3 items to Rebeccah.
Yay. The budget sub met on Monday the 4th at 3:30 p.m. on Zoom and discussed ALG, which happened that morning, and updates to the current budget plans for FY25. Structural changes, revenue opportunities, and HIT were part of that budget development conversation, with most time spent planning for ways to ensure fiscal responsibility during this difficult time. We are planning 2 budgets to prepare for the possibility that an override doesn't pass this year. We are having the hard conversations, creating a list of priorities and contingencies. So much is still fluid right now, but we want the community to know that we take this charge very seriously and are diligent in our planning process. Please reach out with any questions or ideas, as Adam said earlier, because we're all in this together and we want everybody on board. Our next meeting is actually going to be Friday the 15th at 7:30 a.m. on Zoom. It's an unusual time for us, but we're adding some more meetings to the calendar to tackle this work. For ALG, we met Monday. Okay. ALG met on Monday the 4th at 7:30 a.m. at the town hall and discussed the HIT update and override plans. There's group consensus around having an override, but the amount is still to be determined. No one wants to burden the taxpayers, most especially now with the pandemic still wreaking havoc on our finances. But we also cannot have this, we cannot will this budget deficit away by burying our heads in the sand. We have to face this together. So again, reach out with any questions or ideas. It's vital that the community comes along with us for these conversations, so all perspectives are heard and ideas are explored. The next meeting will be Monday the 18th at 7:30 a.m. at the town hall. And for the SRO subcommittee update, our last meeting was Tuesday the 5th. Yeah, it's Tuesday the 5th. The recommendations that we had put together and made sure that everybody felt comfortable with what we were moving forward with and voted on that. And that was our last meeting. So the subcommittee is now finished with our work.
Thanks, Rebeccah. So we're going to go back. Peter, I think you have a couple additions around budget sub, and then we'll also see if there are any questions from the committee on budget sub.
Yeah, and Sherry, I'm going to look at you because I'm putting you on notice. I might put you on the spot in about 1 second. And Adam let me know, right before the meeting, Corinne, you had sent in a good question about how did the deficit go from initially projecting at 7 million up to 9.5. So I don't know if you can add just a little bit of information to why we might have started at 7 and gone to 9.5 in a relatively short amount of time.
The biggest piece of it is we were using excess and deficiency reserves that we are now not using. So we had 1.375 million that we were going to use from our reserves. But seeing that we now have to use some of those reserves for the health insurance trust, it isn't wise to have your reserves go under $1 million. So if we were to put that 1.375 towards our FY25, we would go well below that. So we took that out. So that became, our revenues went down and our expenses went up.
And I'll add that throughout this process, Peter's been very clear to both identify the fact that this is happening very early and to send huge gratitude over to the rest of the administration that's been preparing this. This level service budget, this model that we've been looking at for the past 2 months now, typically doesn't get produced until another month from now. And part of that reason, my sense, is because a lot of things change between now and then. But we knew that we were going to have a really tough year. And it's unfortunate that it just kept on getting tougher and tougher over the past few months with health insurance, with additional special ed costs and special ed transportation and all of those things. So, I think that as that as the budget got harder, we also recognized that we needed to provide ourselves with a better buffer for next year, depending on what happens. And so that's another reason why we decided not to, as our traditional sort of usage of E&D has occurred, not to do that for next year, to pull that out and make sure that we reset some of what Peter's been talking about, those structural issues with our budget.
Yeah, Corinne, additionally, like the 1,375,000 that we had, we just carried it forward because it was what was budgeted this year. Obviously, you know, we heard the health insurance amount that we're likely to pull from E&D. Nowhere near comes to 1,375,000. So it's not just, it's not, I mean, the health insurance is certainly a piece of it, but that's not the majority of it. The majority of taking out E&D is that we're going to end up, you know, probably with about $1 million in reserves, or just slightly under $1 million, slightly over at the end of this year. And I think we recognize that you can't go into a school year on a $100+ million budget and carry less than 1% in reserves for something to happen. It's just, it would be so wildly irresponsible to do that, that we can't continue to budget on E&D. It also allows us, you know, even though it makes it more painful in this year, it actually allows us to create, you know, fix one of those structural areas of the budgets that's been plaguing us over the last several years, which is budgeting on reserves. I think one of our goals in this budget moving forward is to take a really hard look at where we've been allocating money and make some hard decisions now that allow us to move forward and not end up in the same position year after year after year. So that's one element of it. You know, I also think there's probably some other smaller adjustments that go into that. You know, circuit breaker usage, I think, also was an element of that because of some of the extraordinary special ed costs. You know, we've been talking a lot about next year's special ed costs, but a lot of those costs are actually happening in the current year as well, where special ed programs are coming in well over budget. We've talked about staffing publicly, but we're seeing the same thing in out-of-district tuitions as well as transportation. So our circuit breaker usage is up as well because we have to get through the current year, which means now we don't have that circuit breaker available for usage in the next year's budget. So we had to also reduce about $500,000 of circuit breaker usage next year because we have to carry enough that should we, you know, experience a couple out of district placements that could be very costly, we're able to absorb that money. So it was really a combination of factors. And then some other was, you know, we had been doing some early projections, but then our finance and HR teams were actually going through every staff member in the district, rolling up salaries, and going through, you know, every line item in the budget. What have we paid for charter school assessments over the last several years? Has it been sufficient that what we've been projecting forward? What are the actual expenditures? And really looking hard at how do we calculate line items that are actually reflective of cost so that we're not always trying to catch up to the budget numbers. So there certainly are a lot of adjustments. I feel the same way of how did we go from 7 million to 9.5 million in a relatively short amount of time. I think it's because, you know, A, we're so early in the year where we're not usually doing it at this point. B, you know, we wanted to try and get to an accurate number as fast as possible, but that meant we had to build it as we were going. And then two, really those two types of reserve accounts, we have to rethink how we're using them and make sure we're budgeting for the future on what I hope is a better model.
Thanks, Peter. Andrew, I hope you were taking notes there. We need all of that in the FAQ. Perfect. I've been fortunate enough to sit next to Peter at a number of these meetings, and the challenge that we have is that it's not a simple one-line answer about what is the cause, what are we doing, how are we going to resolve it. And so I encourage everyone on the committee, if you've got questions about this, wait for Peter's video to come out. I think that that'll be illustrative, but also feel free to reach out to any of the members on the budget subcommittee. We've been living this a couple weeks longer for you, and expect as we get into the new year, we're going to spend a lot more time on budget and budget presentations in this session. Any other questions or comments on budget subcommittee, ALG, or school resource officer subcommittee updates that Becca gave? Okay. So we're going to move on to our consent agenda. I will point out that there was one amendment to our meeting minutes from 11:2 and 11:16, and that was just to correct the spelling of Tori's name. Apologies to Tori for that. So I will remind everybody that items on the consent agenda do not usually require discussion and are approved with one vote unless any member would like to hold an item for discussion and a separate vote. I'll read each of these items, and if a member would like it held, please say hold. And as a reminder, you don't need to have been present to attend a meeting, present at a meeting to vote on the minutes. So item number 1 is approval of the ABRSC meeting minutes of 11/2/23 and 11/16/23 as amended. Approval of the McCarthy Town School PTSO donations, and item 3, approval of the Carol Hubner Early Childhood Program Parent-Teacher Association budget. Given that no items were held, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
So moved.
Second.
That was Vikram and then Liz. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Relatively unanimous. Becca was just walking into the room, so that's all right. If everyone has reviewed the warrants, there's motion language.
I move that the school committee vote to approve the below-listed warrants totaling $11,401,372.25. AP vendor warrants as follows. 24-010A, dated November 9th, 2023, in the amount of $2,852 even. 24-010B, dated November 16th, 2023, in the amount of $749,167.47. 24-011A, dated November 22nd, 2023, in the amount of $101,169.55. 24-001B, dated November 30th, 2023, in the amount of $2,247,741.02. Payroll vendor warrants as follows. 24-010PR, dated November 16th, 2023, in the amount of $660,920.60. 24-011PR, dated November 30th, 2023, in the amount of $1,494,803.37. Payroll warrants as follows. P2410, dated November 16th, 2023, in the amount of $3,109,734.68. P2411, dated November 30th, 2023, in the amount of $3,024,231.56. And Arbiter Sports Athletic Official warrant as follows. 24-011AS, dated November 22nd, 2023, in the amount of $10,752 even.
Second.
Tori seconded that. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? That is unanimous. Thank you. Peter, anything in the FYI we want to update? Let's be honest, we didn't have enough work already that we couldn't get much into the FYI.
No, I think, one thing that probably is worth paying attention to as we go through the budgeting season are the enrollment numbers. And so the enrollment numbers are a piece of the FYI on a monthly basis, and those are in your packet.
Thank you. With that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved. So moved.
Second.
All right, we'll give that to Vikram and then Tori. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? That's unanimous. Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.